Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 17th of January 2018. So coming to the first article, following the grain trail, the opinion is that many states have initiated reforms of the public distribution system that are hurting millions of people. Now coming to the context is that the editorial deals with an analysis of the public distribution system in the country vis-a-vis reforms like the Aadhaar as well as the direct benefits transfer with respect to the PDS system in the country. So that is the entire context. Now something about the author. The author here, John Dries, is a Belgian-born Indian economist. He is one of the propounders of the National Food Security Act. He was a part of the Economic Advisory Council under the UPA government. So definitely the article is important. It is written by an expert. However, one disclaimer, this article is largely a critique to the Aadhaar and DBT with respect to the PDS system. And definitely the analysis that the author has brought about is valid, it is acceptable, but as I have always mentioned that an absolute critique is never welcome in the UPSC answers. Definitely a balance needs to be drawn. Both Aadhaar and DBT have had their benefits on the PDS system and have huge scope for reforming and overhauling this entire system. So that cannot be ignored. So that is the disclaimer here. Now coming to some background. First and foremost, what do you understand by the PDS system? The PDS system or the public distribution system is a system of distribution of food grains to the vulnerable citizens in the country. This is largely with the view to ensure food security at economical costs to the vulnerable groups. Another thing is that the network, just to show you the enormity of the network, there are approximately 5,35,000 PDS stores in the country. This is almost 2 times that of the panchayats in the country. Also, this was a system that started in the 1940s. So that's about the PDS system. Coming to some more background, that is about the Chhattisgarh model of PDS. Now, this model has been mentioned even in this article, and this is considered as one of the best PDS models in the country. It has received several accolades across the country. Many states are now adopting the Chhattisgarh model. Now, some key and salient features about the Chhattisgarh model I have enumerated here. First and foremost, this model adopted a system where it eliminated all the middlemen involved in the PDS. Another step that the government took over there was that of deprivatization of the ration shops, and they handed it over to groups like the self-help groups, the Gram Panchayats, the One Suraksha Samitis and other community institutions. So this is an important point, that of deprivatization and handing it over to the community institutions. Another thing was that the system used technology very innovatively. For example, SMS alerts were given to the citizens once ration was taken by them. So all of this made the system very much transparent. It made the system, it also included making the system online. So such kind of reforms were very much beneficial to the PDS system in Chhattisgarh. Another thing was related to the procurement. The government of Chhattisgarh really strengthened its procurement system, and it adopted steps like direct purchase from the farmers. It has been strengthened to the extent that today Chhattisgarh has the third highest contributor to the central pool of grains after Punjab and Haryana. So this is a great achievement for this state. Another thing is that the model of PDS in Chhattisgarh was not only about food security but about nutrition security. It not only included food grains but other aspects also. For example, pulses were included, grams were given, salt was given, sugar was given. So all of these things resulted in a all-encompassing PDS. So that was a good aspect. Another thing is that it really expanded the priority list to include a large number of vulnerable groups. For example, widows were included, rickshaw pullers were included. So a number of people were taken in this ambit. So that is why Chhattisgarh model is one of the best PDS models in the country. Now coming to the article itself, it is largely based on a case study of Jharkhand. So that is important. You can use this example, this case study specifically in your answers. Now, an analysis has been drawn on the Aadhaar. The first issue that the author has brought about is that of exclusion. The author here suggests that Aadhaar, linking of ration cards with the Aadhaar has resulted in a massive exclusion of especially the vulnerable groups, which included the widows, the disabled, the elderly. As in many cases, the ration cards, because of the fact that they couldn't be linked with Aadhaar, they were not given the benefits under the PDS. Also, in yesterday's discussion itself, we discussed that how the elderly and the manual laborers are often subject to changing fingerprints, changing biometrics. So in that respect, again, they are often at the fear of being excluded from the government benefits. So that is is one aspect that has been analyzed. Another thing is that of connectivity and biometric failures. Now, the government went in for linking Aadhaar with the ration cards without ensuring that adequate connectivity was provided to all the PDS stores. So this became a major issue, and often due to connectivity and biometric failures, people couldn't get their adequate benefits, the benefits for which they were entitled. They couldn't get those public benefits. So that is one issue. Another thing is that in the aftermath of this exclusion, what happened is that the grains that were being left with the PDS stores, these grains were being siphoned out by the PDS officials, and this resulted in a renewed form of corruption in the PDS. So that is another problem with the linking of Aadhaar to the ration cards. Now, also the case of Santoshi Kumari has been mentioned here. This is very, very important because Santoshi Kumari was an 11-year-old Dalit girl who died due to hunger. Now, the author here brings out a case that this was largely because she couldn't avail this public benefit from the PDS in the backdrop of her ration card being cancelled due to its non-linkage with Aadhaar. So this is one case that the author has brought about, and this is an important case. You should use such cases in your answers. Another is the issue of mass cancellation. The author has given a figure that approximately 11 lakh ration cards had been cancelled by the government, and the government called these ration cards as ghost beneficiaries. But this was not true, and this was not verified, as a majority of these cases were of families who couldn't get their ration cards linked to Aadhaar. So a lot of mass cancellation was a hoax. That is what the authors analyzed. Another thing that has been brought about is that the officials of the state, even if they realize that these shortcomings of linking the ration card with Aadhaar, they cannot do much about it because they are under pressure from the central government to link Aadhaar with the PDS system. So this is about a matter of pressure from the central government, which is unwelcome in the federal setup of the country. So that is an analysis that has been drawn. Now, coming to the analysis on the direct benefits transfers, there the aim is that people will have to collect their subsidy in cash before they can use it to buy the ration. So the shortcomings related to DBT are, first and foremost, it results in a roundabout way. Now, what is this roundabout way? This means that a person in whose bank account the subsidy has been credited will first go to the bank to check whether his subsidy has been credited or not. Once it is assured that the subsidy has been credited, then he will go to something called a Pragya Kendra, which is a community center from where you can get cash. The subsidy he will get a cash, because even the banks are favoring that people should go to these Pragya Kendras. Then once he has gone to the Pragya Kendras, then he will go to the PDS store and then he can collect his ration. So this is a very complicated process, and also one which is very troublesome, especially in the case of the elderly and the disabled. Such kind of inconvenience is unwelcome. Often it results in a number of problems to the citizens. For example, they have to stand in queues, and and it leads to wastage of their time. So these kind of hardships is what the people have to face. Another thing is that there is a growing problem for multiple account holders. Now, what is happening is that for citizens who have many accounts, there is a lack of clarity as to in which account the subsidy has been credited. So this is a ground level problem which the policymakers have not analyzed. The approach that the policymakers have largely adopted to is an ivory tower approach. It is away from the ground reality. So these are the problems which need to be redressed, and these are not being considered. So that is an analysis that the author has brought about with regards to the direct benefits transfer. Now, some general issues that have been raised is that, first and foremost, this entire problem of making PDS dependent upon Aadhaar as well as on the direct benefits transfer is resulting in something of a renewed form of food insecurity in the country, because despite the efforts of the government, despite the fact that right to food is a legal right of the citizens, they are unable to accrue the benefits because of these complicated procedures. So that is one analysis that the author has brought about. Another thing is that it is leading to something of a centralization and technocracy model, especially in the backdrop of the diktats by the central government, where the state governments are being forced to adopt the policy of Aadhaar as well as direct benefits transfer. So this is something that is not welcoming. This is not good for the governance in the country, as decentralization is something that is the backbone, it is the spirit of India's constitution. This is not something that is happening, and it is leading to more and more centralization and also technocracy. So these are key words, and I would suggest you to use these in your answers. Another thing is that related to citizen woes, as I mentioned before also, that the hardship that the citizens are facing is something that has not been considered. Another aspect is that there have been a lack of awareness programs and training programs for the citizens, and without these awareness and training programs, they are being forced into a more complicated procedure of the Aadhaar and the DBT. Another thing is that the citizens are being treated as guinea pigs for these undependable technologies, and is it right to do that? So that is one issue. Another thing is that there is a problem with ineffective grievance redressal, and also the redressal through law authorities is a slow process. So quick redressal to the grievances is something that is not happening, and this is leaving the citizens very much vulnerable in this case. So that is the entire analysis here. Some way ahead can be suggested, for example, improving the infrastructure related to improving internet connectivity. Also steps like protection to the vulnerables like the elderly and the disabled. We can ensure door-to-door delivery for them. So such kind of steps are definitely welcome in this regard. So whenever an opportunity is provided where you have to critique the Aadhaar and the DBT, these are very much valid and acceptable points. But yet again, I would like to give you a caution that please don't have your answers having a single tone of criticism. Try to bring about a balance. So that is about this particular editorial. Coming to the next article. All Gore. The opinion is that regulating Jallikattu remains an impossible challenge for district authorities in Tamil Nadu. Now, the context of this article is the recent death of onlookers in the Jallikattu events in the Palamedu and Avarangadu districts in Tamil Nadu. Now, similar episodes have also happened in the past. Also, similar cases have happened in the case of Manju Virattu, which is a variety of Jallikattu. Now, this has happened in the backdrop of that the Supreme Court guidelines as well as the government assurances that barricading will be done for the onlookers. So there is an issue of improper administrative management in these events. These events usually take place in the backdrop of the Pongal festivities. So that is the entire context. Now, before we begin, I would like to mention that this particular editorial is not an all-encompassing one, but the importance of the topic Jallikattu. In line with that, I shall be discussing this topic more widely, and I shall not be restricting the discussion to the editorial. Now, before we begin, some background. First and foremost, what is Jallikattu? Jallikattu is an ancient practice or an ancient sport of taming bulls. This is followed in states of Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, in Karnataka. Now, it is usually celebrated in the aftermath of Pongal. Also, this practice is considered about 1,000 years old, and it is sometimes traced to the Sangam era, the era of the Sangam literature. Now, there are some legal issues regarding this particular issue related to Jallikattu. Now, the Supreme Court had banned this practice of Jallikattu in the year 2014. However, this was followed with several protests, especially in the state of Tamil Nadu. Now, the Animal Welfare Board of India has often raised arguments that this sport results in a cruelty to animals. So, it is in this light that many experts, even the Supreme Court for that matter, has advocated for banning this practice, but this has not happened. Later in the year 2017, the governor of Tamil Nadu issued an ordinance to allow Jallikattu. So there has been a legal backing to this process through both by the central government as well as by the state government. The Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act is something that is in question. This act was implemented in the year 1960. So that is the entire background to this issue. Now, coming to several important analyses related to Jallikattu. First is that of administrative lapses and challenges, as has been mentioned in this particular editorial itself. Now, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has called for protecting the onlookers, even the government has given several assurances. The issue is that this event is a huge one, and there are several ground level challenges associated with this event. And in this scenario, there is a huge possibility that administrative lapses can happen. It is a challenging task to curb the bulls, the agitated bulls. So all of this is making this a very, very difficult activity to manage for the administration. So that is the first issue related to Jallikattu. The second issue is that the Animal Welfare Board of India has called out that this is amounting to cruelty to animals. Now, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act cannot cannot be selective. It cannot select some animals as to whom cruelty is not allowed, and to the others to whom cruelty is allowed. Now, in the case of Jallikattu, cases have been reported that the bulls are kept hungry for many days. Many a times their tails are cut, they are injured to agitate them. Chili powder is used in their eyes to further agitate the bull. So these are matters of ethical and moral concerns, and cruelty to animals is something that a civilized society should never welcome. So that is one issue. Third is that of cultural rights of the people. Now, under Article 25 of the Constitution, cultural rights, protection of cultural rights is a fundamental right of the people. And it is under this article that people in Tamil Nadu are calling Jallikattu as the cultural practice and the traditional practice, and they want to protect it. The fears of people are rising in the aftermath of the rise of social media, as they fear that all of this can lead to something called a homogenizing effect. So homogenization is what they are fearing. So that is one analysis that has been drawn. Another thing is that this matter should have been should not have been politicized, but this is unfortunately a politicized issue. The state government is very much, the state parties, both the leading as well as the opposition parties, are supporting Jallikattu. So in such a scenario, any reasonable reform in this regard is not something that is being realized. So that is a major cause of concern. Even the central government is unwilling to take a strong stand on this issue because the matter is politicized. So that is one issue. Another thing related to Jallikattu is the caste angle. Now, what is important here is that traditionally, as this practice goes, the bulls were owned by the lower caste, so-called lower caste people. And what happened is that these people used to maintain these bulls, and the upper caste people were the onlookers. They were the ones who used to come to see this sport. Now, these people who used to take care of the bulls have now raised an issue that it is an issue of livelihood of these people, which is threatened if Jallikattu is banned, as they know nothing else but this has been their traditional sport. So that is one issue that is important here. Protection of these vulnerable groups is what is important before banning Jallikattu. So that is one good analysis related to Jallikattu. Another thing is that there is a lack of uniform approach by the government. For example, animals are being subject to cruelty even in dairy farms, even in zoos. Also, elephants in religious rituals, etc., are being harassed. So all of these cases show that the government needs a holistic approach, and when it bans cruelty to bulls and Jallikattu, people bring about these examples that other animals are being harassed. So definitely a uniform approach is what is needed by the government. So that is one analysis related to Jallikattu. Entirely the topic is of much importance for UPSC. So that is why I have taken it a bit in detail. Now coming to the next article. Face the inevitable. The opinion is staggering the losses of banks due to a spurt in bond yields is no solution. Now, this is an important article, and the important part is the basic understanding of it. Now, coming to the context is that the yield on Indian 10-year benchmark government bonds has risen steeply from 6.5% to 7.56%. Now, as I have always mentioned, that the figures are not so much important as much as the understanding of the issue is. Now, in this regard, the banks have requested the RBI to allow them to stagger the reporting of these losses over several quarters, especially because also the banks are faced with the problem of NPAs, and all of this will ensure that the share prices of the banks remain stable. So this is the entire context. Now, coming to the basic understanding part, first and foremost, you should know what is a bond. Now, a bond is a debt instrument which has a time period of more than 1 year. These bonds are largely issued by the government and they are purchased by the banks. So suppose a bond of rupees 1000 is issued, a bond of suppose 10,000 is issued by the government, and this bond is purchased by the bank with an interest of 10%. So this means that the bank will get annually an interest of 1000 rupees. And after 1 year, the bank will get an interest of 1000 rupees. Now the time period will be varying. For example, it can be 10-year time period. Now, what is important here is that why are these banks buying these bonds? These banks are buying these bonds because the banks are in the Indian banking system, banks have to compulsorily maintain a cash reserve ratio as well as SLR, with the government. So it is in this respect that banks are often interested in buying these government bonds. So that is one analysis. Now, what is the problem with bond yield? What is bond yield and what is bond price? For that, you need to understand that if this bond is issued for 10 years, then in such a case, the bank is not going to keep this bond for interest rates for 10 years. So there is something called a bond market. Now, a bank might want its money that it has invested in the bonds sooner than this time period. So, in such a scenario, the banks are much willing to sell their bonds in this bond market. Now, what happens in the bond market is that the bonds are to be sold at a price which is known as the bond price. Now, when these banks are selling their bonds, either the price can be high or the price can be low. Now, if the price is low, if the bond price is low, suppose the bank had purchased this bond at rupees 10,000 and now it has to sell this bond at rupees 9,000. So, in such a scenario, the bond price is low, but something called bond yield. Now, what do you understand by bond yield? Bond yield is basically the return a person gets from purchasing a bond. So, if a person is purchasing this bond for 9,000, the interest rate continues to be 10%. In such a scenario, this person will get a greater yield. This person who has purchased it here. So, the yield for this person will be around 1100 rupees after 1 year, whereas for the bank, it was only 1000 rupees. Similarly, if this person is buying this bond for say about 10,500 rupees, so in this scenario, the yield for this person is going to be less. If the bond price was more, so the yield on the bond price will be less. So that is the relation between bond price and bond yield, which is an inversely proportional one. So whenever the bond price is high, the bond yield will be less, and whenever the bond yield is high, the bond price will be less. So that is the analysis that you need to understand. So now what has happened is regarding the present scenario, what has happened is that the government is facing fiscal deficit. So in this regard, the government has proposed that it is going to issue more bonds. So in this respect, what has happened is that in the secondary market, in the secondary bond market, the prices of bonds have fallen. So the bond prices have fallen, as a result of which bond yields have increased. Now, because of the fact that banks are the majority purchasers of these bonds, these banks are bound to suffer losses because the bond prices have been falling and they will not be able to sell their bonds at remunerative prices. So this is the entire issue related to this problem of increased bond yields and falling bond prices. Now, what are the issues which happen in the aftermath of this? First and foremost, the issues that have been raised is that of banks' compulsions. Now, this is with regards to two events. First and foremost is demonetization. Demonetization was a decision that the government took and banks were not taken into confidence. Now, this resulted in a cash surplus with the public sector banks. And this cash surplus, the banks had to invest this cash surplus somewhere. So they were indirectly coerced to buy more and more government bonds. So that is one issue. Another thing is, as I mentioned, that the CRR and SLR regime in the country compels the banks again to invest in the government bonds. So the issue of purchasing bonds is something of a compulsion to the banks rather than their individual choice. So that is one analysis that has been drawn. Another thing is that the deposits in the banks have continuously been rising, but the credits from the banks is not something that is rising. So in such a scenario, again, the banks are left with no choice but to spend this money on buying bonds. So these are some analysis of the compulsions that the Indian banking system is facing. Now, another issue is that of accounting deception. Now, the banks have proposed to the RBI that the losses that they are suffering at the behest of this increase in the bond yields, which is to the tune of 15,000 crore, this they do not wish to show immediately in their accounts, and they rather wish to stagger it for some period. Now, this is something that is going to amount to an accounting deception, because even if the bank's health is not going to be a good one, they are going to show a rosy picture and they are going to show that that they are a healthy institution. So this is something that is unwelcome. This is something that is going to lack transparency. So this is one issue. Another issue is that of risks in the bond market. Now, the RBI has reiterated that the banks are much aware of the risks that are inherent of the bond market. Also, these investments in bonds is not something that is done by laymen, it is done by experts in the banks. So, the banks should be prepared to face these risks. That is one analysis. Another issue is that of accountability of the banks. Now, this is time and again coming that the banks are not being held accountable. First and foremost, for example, with regards to lending decisions of the bank, which has resulted in the NPA problems of the bank. Also, now that the bank is facing these losses, the banks need to be made accountable for their investment decisions, and nobody else should be made accountable. So that is one issue that has been raised. Also, the banks should take the responsibility of their losses, which the banks have been avoiding to do. Even in the case of NPAs, they have been asking for bailouts by the government. And also now when they are facing losses, they are asking for greater relief from the RBI. So these kind of issues clearly reflect that the banks are unwilling to take their responsibilities. So these are the issues related to this problem. The article is important in analyzing the health of the banking sector in the country. Now coming to the next article, the people connection. The article is not a very important one, but has few important analysis. First and foremost, the context is that of people-to-people relations between India and Israel. The background part is a small one, that first and foremost, India recognized Israel in the year 1950. India allowed for an Israel embassy in India in the year 1953. This embassy was opened in Mumbai. However, the Indian embassy in Israel opened in the year 1992, and it is in this year that formal diplomatic relations between the two countries started. And so this year 2017-18 is celebrated as the 25 years of formal diplomatic relations between India and Israel. Now, an analysis has been drawn here with regards to the people-to-people relations. The first point is that the Jews in India were always welcome. Despite the fact that Jews face discrimination globally, India was one country where Jews did not face this discrimination. And a large number of Jews did come to India as well. However, later these Jews also opted in the aftermath of formation of Israel. A number of Indian Jews moved back to Israel, and this moving back to Israel is known as Aliyah. This movement of Jews back to their homeland is known as Aliyah. So a number of Indian Jews chose for this Aliyah, and it is these Jews who form a particular community in Israel, and this is somehow termed as an Indian diaspora, though technically they are not a part of the diaspora, but they are termed as an Indian diaspora, and they have been called as a potential human bridge between India and Israel. So that is the importance of this particular population and this particular group. Another aspect relating to people-to-people relations is that with regards to tourism between the two countries. Now, India is seen as one of the most preferred tourism destination by the Israeli youth, especially in the aftermath of the compulsory military training, which is of 2 years for girls and 3 years for boys in Israel. This is for many reasons. First and foremost is that it is very rare and very few countries where Israeli citizens feel safe, and India is amongst those countries. Also, India allows for a lot of freedoms to these people, and the Israeli citizens do not face prejudices in India, and they're very much welcome. So in that respect, India is one of the most favored tourism destinations for these people. Also, the present initiative between the two governments is to increase tourism from India to Israel. So that is something that is being envisaged. Also, soft policies like Bollywood movies being shot in Israel. So these kind of ideas are being mooted. So that is what is important in people-to-people relation. Another thing is that in any foreign relations and any form of diplomacy, people-to-people relations forms the bedrock of relation between two countries. This has time and again been mooted, and this is something that is important in this respect also. So that's about this article. Now, before we end, some piece of information. We are starting a UPSC Prelims cum Mains classes from January 21st. It shall be covering all basics, which will be including NCERT's daily newspaper, prelims test series and mains answer writing. So all interested candidates, please do get in touch with us. These are our contact details and this is our phone number. So with this, I finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching and I hope to see you tomorrow.